Great. Can we need to leave? Yeah, that's great. Great. Well, while the panelists are taking their seats, I'm Orville Schell. It's wonderful to see you all here. I have to say that my own school is on the road, the dead-end road that leads to the great hole, which is slowly being filled to create the CITRIS building. And normally, one might take umbrage at the endless traffic of trucks, but each time I hear one, I think to myself, well, this is in the name of a very good cause, and in a certain cryptic way, it makes me feel quite glad. And I'm really pleased to be able to be here. Sorry, Rich Newton isn't, but to substitute for him. The task at hand is really this for our panel today. Rich Newton had a notion of the idea of a DMZ, a kind of a demilitarized zone where industry, academic endeavors, and government efforts could all get together, a sort of a commons. And I think it's a very interesting idea, a place that really universities need to make a greater effort to occupy. What is sort of interesting about the role of CITRIS, I think, is the fact that it represents a piece of a whole new rearrangement of research and development landscape, a new piece that has as its final goal actually applying some of these technologies in society. And that's really what we're here to consider today. How has this landscape changed? What is the role of universities today? And what is the role going to be of this rather extraordinary new multi-campus creation, CITRIS? So let's start right off. We're asking the panelists to briefly sort of throw out some ideas in addressing the question of the new landscape, the new food chain, if you will, of idea to development, to research, and finally to application that CITRIS represents. So we'll start with Chancellor Birgeneau.
Thank you. Thank you, Orville. This is an issue which, as you can imagine, we spent a lot of time thinking, and which happens to connect very directly with my own personal career. I began my career as an independent scientist, as an experimental solid-state physicist at Bell Laboratories in 1968. And at that time, Bell Laboratories was really the mecca for fundamental scientific investigations in the properties of materials and chemistry and information science, etc. It was truly an extraordinary place, and it was really an inspiring time in life. Probably the freest environment I have ever found myself in terms of being able to pursue fundamental problems in science without any concern about either your salary or about your research funding. Bell Laboratories was not alone at that time. At that time, IBM in Yorktown Heights and IBM Zurich, etc., had wonderful research labs. Just south of Bell Laboratories in New Jersey was RCA Laboratories. Out in the West Coast, there was Xerox and Xerox PARC, where just transformative research took place, etc. There was a long list of great industrial research laboratories which spanned the spectrum from fundamental investigations to quite applied research. A laser diode, which underlies CD players, et cetera, right, came out of these institutions. In addition to that, and for my own personal research, also the kind of research I did accessed facilities at the large national laboratories. So in addition to the great industrial research laboratories, we also had great national laboratories. During the period I was at Bell Labs, 7 or 8 years, running experiments at Brookhaven, there were 3 separate experiments, unfortunately not mine, taking place at Brookhaven, which subsequently won the Nobel Prize. 7 of my colleagues at Bell Laboratories won the Nobel Prize. In addition to then the great national laboratories, which did terrific fundamental research, of course, then there was also the universities. So we had this three-leg stool of industrial research laboratories, the national laboratories, and universities. Of course, as a result of the consent decree and a variety of business decisions, although we still have industrial laboratories, their character is totally different. And especially for very long-range research, it hasn't completely disappeared, but it really looks nothing like it did in the 60s. And we still have the national laboratories, but with the prominent exception of Lawrence Berkeley Lab and one or two others, they no longer are preeminent in the way that they were several decades ago. And then we have great industrial laboratories, but almost inevitably focused on much shorter term issues, as I said already. So really the landscape has changed dramatically in a way which, in my view, has really increased significantly the importance of universities carrying out long-range research and development in direct partnership with industry, translating knowledge created in universities into the marketplace. And so we really have a new paradigm now, which CITRIS is, of course, a major player, but which, in my opinion, is not fully developed and which we need to continue to work on.
Thank you, Chancellor Birgeneau. Next, we have David Tennenhouse, and maybe you could offer some perspective from the private side of how you see the relationship of universities to startups, technology firms such as you've been involved in.
Definitely my pleasure, and some in the audience will probably realize that and are aware that prior to being associated with Amazon A9, I was involved with Intel Research and really organizing industrial research around a different model than Bell Labs had, one that was very much focused on intense collaboration with the universities, particularly the UC system, but also others. And I think the chancellors really hit it. In some sense, the way I think of this is the genie has escaped the Bell Labs bottle. And that, yes, Bell Labs was extremely effective in the research it did. It generated a certain number of Nobel Prizes, tremendous insights, as did the other sort of great industrial research labs. But the vast bulk of the time, the truly great discoveries were actually in the wrong place, in the sense that they were in the context of a company that couldn't fully take advantage of those discoveries. So we had an inherent inefficiency in the system that is, I think, wonderfully addressed when the fundamental and basic discovery engine is the university. The discoveries can then flow directly to where they can most effectively be used. And so I think that, that this transition from a small number of corporate research labs to essentially a much larger number of researchers based in a much more public forum is a really positive one. And I think it's far too late to go back, and I think that's a wonderful thing. In many of these fields, we have many more researchers than we did before. I'm a networking researcher, and even in networking, which should have been Bell Lab's specialty, I think we've had a tremendous renaissance of network research now that essentially it's an open forum for universities to participate. So I think that's phenomenal as a source of ideas in terms of the university's role. I think another role that the industrial organizations and industrial research labs of their day played, Bell Labs, Xerox PARC, is they were such a significant concentration of experts in an area that essentially everybody else had to go visit them, which meant that they became the meeting points and the points at which ideas were exchanged, albeit very centralized. I think that we now have essentially, again, with our research system, the universities have now become very public. I'm a networking person, so I think of it in networking terms, packet switches for ideas. And I think this has actually become now an immensely important role for the universities, not just to source the ideas, but to be the place where ideas, regardless of where they were sourced, are actively exchanged amongst participants so they can flow to the best place.
Thank you, David.
Can I add something?
You're going to be next, Beth, so you may add something, and then...
One of the things that arises from this transformation of interactions between universities and the industry research enterprise is that intellectual property becomes a very complicated and interesting subject. and it deals with two cultures that are coming from very different missions, and melding those two cultures at the interface of the agreements is a real challenge that I think I can say without any objection from anybody from the industry side has been handled a little bit bumpily on the side of the universities for a while, because they saw a few huge blockbuster income producing, usually pharmaceutical intellectual property patents make a whole lot of money for a few universities, and it created a mentality that a tech transfer office was supposed to be generating income for the university. And I think it's taken a while for people to get it that doesn't really apply at all. In fact, relatively few tech transfer offices even pay their own expenses in universities around the country. In reality, we envision the tech transfer operation or the intellectual property management to be a mechanism for making sure we maximize the impact of our research enterprise in the real world. And so that means that we've had to change our mindset from the early pharmaceutical model of how you would do exclusive licensing kinds of approaches to consider a lot more sector-specific examples. And CITRIS is a very good example of a place where a focus on open collaboration has made it one of these switch packets for interaction in a demilitarized zone for industry and university researchers to share. And I think there's been a lot of effort in the Bay Area. The Bay Area Science and Innovation Consortium, BASIC, has had a subgroup that's been working on intellectual property issues to try to get some lubrication into this interaction. And there are a number of people here, actually, I noticed from the BASIC group, and that includes HP and Intel and a number of other high-tech, IBM, high-tech groups in the area. There R&D people and leadership from the research side of the universities who've been sitting down talking about how do we facilitate pathways through this so that we really maximize the ability of this interface between the research enterprise at the industry side and the basic researchers and the scientists and engineers at the universities. And I think there's really a lot of positive steps being made.
Thank you, Beth. Shankar, talk to us a little bit about your vision for, you're the major domo of CITRIS, your vision for it, and what do you think the unique opportunities are for CITRIS being situated here in California and on the edge of the Pacific? What are the ripple effects that you'd like to see radiate out from this venture?
Let me sort of give you sort of from the faculty side sort of three drivers. I think the aspirations of the faculty have grown in just the last 5 or 10 years. As a result, faculty want to take on bigger and bigger projects. And I think the multidisciplinarity that you're seeing on campuses is very much an adjunct of the fact that faculty want to take on bigger and bigger projects which cross boundaries. So we use the term multidisciplinarity to celebrate both disciplinary excellence and the fact that a lot of the opportunities are in the boundaries. So that's one trend. The second trend is a lot of our faculty and students and researchers and scientists, I should say in deference to our chancellor, have realized that this model of sort of just developing something cool and just throwing it over the wall and expecting that society will change simply wasn't working. So I think there's a great desire to not just develop the technologies, not just do the technology push and the science push, but to also make sure that you find a way to get stakeholders, frequently societal stakeholders, to take notice of the potential of this technology and to then baby it in through adoption. The third trend is what Beth just talked about, which is a culture in which ownership of intellectual property is one which is designed to maximize the impact of the research. I think a philosophy, even though CITRIS is new, it's 5 years old, I think the experience here at Berkeley over the last 30 years, I came here as a graduate student, so at least since 1977, has been one in which it's been Unix, it's been Internet protocols, IP protocols, it's been RISC, it's been BSD, and all of those have been based on the principle that in order to be pre-competitive, it's been important, in order to stay ahead of industry, in order to not trip over the feet of researchers in industrial labs, it's important to have adopted a policy of, by and large, sharing intellectual property with all of our friends in industry, and then benefiting from the startups and the success of the companies around us. If you put all of these three together, this is sort of the heritage. And I think CITRIS really tries to put together the fact that societal interests come first. It's societal scale systems. Those are the ones that we need in transportation, in healthcare, in energy, in the environment, in education, and really the kinds of technology that we need are adjunct for serving those societal goals. And even though we began first with really California's problems, we very quickly realized that California's problems are the nation's problems, and indeed internationally. And I'm very pleased to say that we have now very substantial international relationships with Finland, Denmark, Japan, Taiwan, and India. So I think the model, my aspirations for CITRIS are that really that we work on the most compelling problems with the best technologies that we have of the day, and that the impact is in the form of better trained students, of course, but also to keep this technology pipeline full. The Bell Labs, the IBMs, the IBM Research Labs, and all the other research labs, they created this technology pipeline so that even when you were commercializing today's technology, there was 5 years more of good ideas in the back waiting to burst forth. And that would be my aspirations for CITRIS. Thank you very much.
Now, before we throw it open to questions from you all, let me just probe a little bit amongst the four of you. It seems to me what's really striking about this venture are the last two words in its title, in the public interest, in the interest of society. What's the rest of the landscape in universities look like in terms of research that's so directly consecrated to sort of breaking through that blood-brain barrier, which often does keep universities somewhat isolated in their knowledge from actually becoming incarnate in practice and in having a societal effect? Who would like to offer some thoughts on that?
I'll start and then hand off. I think as someone who really began my career frankly interested only in really quite fundamental issues in science, not just because I've evolved in an administrative career, but also the world I live in. I think there has been a very significant evolution in people in the university sector, presumably also in the industrial sector, wanting to find ways of connecting whatever basic research they do to society as a whole. And Beth and I have had a really invigorating experience the last month, which has been an extreme example of this and an interesting model for university-industrial interaction in the service of society, in which CITRIS will play a very important role. And that, as some of you may know, that British Petroleum has proposed establishing a energy biomass research institute in partnership with the university. And they stepped up to the plate at the level of $500 million. So $50 million a year over the next 10 years. And that's the beginning investment. So that's not the run out. And they invited proposals from a select number of universities, of which we've been one. We are one, and led by Beth and by Steve Chu at LBL. And so we've put together a consortium of ourselves, Lawrence Berkeley Lab, the Carnegie Institute at Stanford, and the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, because in Berkeley we have about 2 acres of land to try out plants, and they have thousands. And the science and technology of this has been very interesting. Intellectual property has been very interesting, but I think just as interesting has been the number of people in the campus, molecular biologists working on ribosomes, who are interested in changing their research areas to address this, basically of solving a global climate change problem and making the U.S. energy self-sufficient, and just have been waiting for us to bring together the set of people, the set of talents. So this has really been an interesting life experience, which has happened in. Normally, often we universities get accused of proceeding at a glacial pace. This, from start to finish, has taken about 2 months to put together this research, multi-institutional research collaboration with a very, very sophisticated science and engineering and business plan. And frankly, even if it turns out British Petroleum makes some other choice, we certainly, and I'm sure this is going to be a very important part of CITRIS endeavors as well, are going to move forward on this one way or another. Frankly, last year, the top 5 oil companies had profits of $169 billion. So they have a little bit of flexibility.
I mean, and one could ask also, where better to do a venture like this than a public university?
Absolutely.
After all, we are consecrated to the public interest. Beth, did you, or David, do you?
Well, I think your question was how the university landscape was, and I think that you just hit it. The public universities, and I think the UC system amongst kind of all the public universities in this country, at least, are really the folks that will make the effort to focus on societal goals. I don't think this necessarily does apply to every university. And I think something that I've always noticed in my interaction with UC is I actually believe that faculty self-select and students self-select. They choose departments and departments choose them. And that within the UC system, that effectively, on average, you will see a much higher societal interest than perhaps in other universities where you might see a higher pure science interest or pure engineering interest or industry interest, et cetera. I'm just talking about sort of where the mean is, and there's a distribution around that. And in the UC system as a whole, I think it's very tilted towards these societal interests. And they're just absolutely crucial to us now. We're realizing these all are multidisciplinary. If we look across the gamut, whether it's energy, whether it's the public infrastructure that we need to desperately to get more efficiency out of and make more intelligent and make work for us, our health system, any of these societal goals need to both be multidisciplinary, but I think require folks that have self-selected with that as a priority for them in their careers. And so from that point of view, I really think the UC system has something unique to offer here. And I think CITRIS has been first to the table in a leadership role. I think this is really going to be important. I'm sorry to take a little more time, because in the United States, if we look at our demographics at a national level, we have a limited amount of human capital to apply to important problems. And essentially, students, we're not going to actually sit down and have a sort of rational discussion of, okay, which problems are we going to work on? It's going to be done on a sort of more chaotic economic basis. People will vote with their feet. And the people that are going to be most important are going to be the students, I think, of these great public universities, who I hope will vote with their feet to take on these societal challenges.
So in a sense, then, CITRIS is a reconsecration of this university and the University of California towards this public goal, which has changed, I think, in some significant ways.
When Richard came to me with the notion of CITRIS, it just immediately rang true. This is exactly the right thing for Berkeley and UC.
Beth, did you have a thought?
I was just going to say, during the preparation of the last couple of months of this proposal for the Energy Biosciences Institute is what it would be. So it's a focus on feedstocks to fuel. It was really inspiring and exciting to see our very best scientists from all there are a whole lot of possible disciplines involved in that long pathway, and scientists that have been doing really basic, very, very basic structural biology, for example. Many scientists, lots and lots of scientists leapt to the opportunity to apply their really specialized expertise and their state-of-the-art knowledge to trying to solve this problem that really moves people. So I was really very impressed with how broad the responsiveness to a societal level challenge like how biofuels, can we really do something? Can we really make them work in a way that's going to be helpful? It was really quite inspiring to see.
Shankar, let me ask you, do you, just in a somewhat personal sense, do you find that your conception of your career, your role as a professor, your role as a director has changed? And do you think there is a trend afoot, not just here, but throughout society in this direction? How do you analyze this tendency which we've been describing?
I think that the lives of a lot of our faculty have changed from thinking more broadly, thinking big about problems. And I think what that does, is to make for much richer kinds of problems to work on. The even disciplinary work becomes considerably deeper. The kinds of questions that one comes up with are pretty deep. Just in thinking about the security of critical infrastructures, coming to myself, thinking about the security of critical infrastructures after 9/11, we realized that one really needed to think about how one puts technology into our infrastructures to make them safe. And then, of course, there has been this public debate about security versus privacy. One thing that we realized during the course of the work, in working with our colleagues in the law school, our colleagues in the information school, and also with the industrial labs, the Intel lablet that David helped establish on the edge of campus, was that it's not an either-or between security and privacy, that technologies that enhance strong privacy also enhance security, which was very much counter to a message that was being given in a lot of the media. So this is an example of one kind of thing that came from thinking about societal problems. Another example is, I won't take Eric Brewer's thunder, he's the last speaker, and I'd like to say that Rich Newton and Tom Khalil really set out to show that there was an economic case to be made for the use of technologies in the developing world. And they called that project ICT4B, which is now called TIER, Information Communication Technologies for the 4 billion people. You said, Dick Blum said 3 billion, so 4 billion, depending on where you draw the threshold, of people making less than this $2 per day. And really, it led to some exemplary challenges for wireless infrastructures, low-cost telephone devices. And I must say, as a result of this, out at CITRIS, we're saying the future is not a $100 laptop, it's a $30 cell phone. And really, that's an example of the kinds of places where it'll make a big difference. And again, the delivery of healthcare in Africa, in India, in Western China are all things that get opened up. Telemedicine, for instance.
Does anybody want to just quickly reflect a little upon the economic sort of catalytic effects of something like this? Dick Blum mentioned not only the university, the area, the state, the nation, and indeed the world. I mean, this is a generator of new businesses, new economies. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I think this goes to what Beth said, which is this is precisely why, it's really not about can the university make a few more bucks on a licensing deal. It's can the state of California generate, a phenomenal number of new jobs. As a nation, do we do a better job of taking care of our people overall? And can we provide a better quality of life to people in other countries? And I think repeatedly we've seen that the key issue, I think, is from an economic perspective at a micro level is what business are you in? And I think where we've made a lot of progress jointly in our discussions is the university getting really clear on what business it was in, which, as you said, we want our work to have impact. And at the industry level, kind of the companies waking up and realizing they better add their value downstream of the universities. The idea that they're going to sort of appropriate by exclusive license the university technology and make their pile out of that just doesn't make sense. They've got to add their value downstream themselves. And that's, I realize, a more micro view of the economics than you were looking for, perhaps. But I think that also will cause more innovation in industry. Everybody gets the start. Everybody has these early insights, and we can all compete aggressively to add value to them. And what will happen is we'll add value in many different ways.
One final short question to you all. There are examples where universities make discoveries, and then instead of them becoming privately owned, they're publicly owned, and there's some examples that have come out of Berkeley. Maybe you, Shankar, would be a good one to address this. Do you imagine this would be part of the calling of CITRIS?
I think that the things that will come out of CITRIS, some of them will really be a whole ton of startups, and there have already been a ton of startups. There's been a lot of industry sectors almost that have been created by the technologies that go into it. But I feel that the legacy of CITRIS will really be this mindset about thinking about the bigger problems that we face, and then sort of compiling that down, to use computer verbiage, down to a set of technological, social, economic issues, and then finally delivering the services that are required to meet societal challenges.
Mm-hmm. David, thought?
I'm sorry to jump in again, but as I listened to Shankar, what I realized is, I'm actually an immigrant, and one of the things I've really learned to respect about the U.S. is the way people will take ideas and figure out how to make money out of them. That's what the U.S. industry does. I mean, in a phenomenal way that, to be honest, my graduate training was in England, and we just didn't get trained to even think like that. And where I'm going with this is that, let's look at an area like public infrastructure. Right now, to be honest, Silicon Valley VCs, that's the most boring thing they could imagine investing in. But go create some innovation in that space, and I bet we can drive a ton of investment and job creation and everything else in those spaces. So in some sense, it's by taking on these challenges, I'm willing to bet that American ingenuity and innovation and figuring out how to make a buck out of it will follow where you lead. And what we'll do is shift the emphasis of where the industry investment ends up.
Good. Bob?
Actually, David's opening comment, I think, is also a relevant one. I also happen to be an immigrant. And Shankar, I don't know if you're an immigrant.
Yes,
but Shankar is also an immigrant. So
I was born in Texas.
And that makes her all.
I'm an immigrant, too.
Especially around these parts.
Right. And I remember in the past serving on a committee at Los Alamos looking at some complicated issues important for defense, and we realized that of the 13 people giving Los Alamos advice, that 5 were born in the United States out of the 13, and this was advice that was fundamental to the security of our nation. I think a very important part of California and California universities, because it's a place which has been characterized by the willingness to take chances and a state that's committed to innovation, is the ability of California to attract from around the world the very best talent. And we've seen a lot of challenges to that, begun with 9/11 and possibly some increase in conservatism. And I think if California is going to continue to lead the country and the world, we're going to have to see an evolution in that and an increased welcoming to people from around the world, and both within the state and at the federal level as well.
Good. All right. Let's throw it open to the floor to questions from you all. There's some microphones, so if you have a question, please raise your hand, or a thought, comment, any of the above. Who would like to right here?
Hi, Dan Pitt. I've got a couple of related questions for you, touching on what you mentioned. One has to do with how you would actually fund this research, which we all agree is of great benefit to society. And the second is how you actually measure its success. When Bell Labs was funding research, it came off the top because it was a regulated industry, and they were permitted by the regulators to invest a certain amount. The major companies have done it in different ways. We've seen IBM Research and HP Labs take the money and fund their own research labs still, and to varying degrees of applied or pure. Companies like Microsoft fund a lot of scientists in universities. Companies like Google hire these same people instead of funding them. Maybe the same individuals in particular. And yet we know there are benefits to society as a whole, to the companies and to individuals. And how do we motivate the private parties, the companies, and the government to fund the research properly? And how do we actually measure that success, whether it's companies started, as Shankar mentioned, or the number of licenses or patents or some societal measures that we then have to correlate to the investment? I appreciate your thoughts on those.
Who would like to try that one? Shankar, by default.
Okay. I think this question of metrics is, of course, is an excellent question. So I think that the metrics that we use. So our first job is a little bit of this caricature. Faculty go to industry and they go and peddle their research, and then they come back and they say, oh, they don't love us for our research, they love us for our students. So I think to first order, really, one of the biggest things, the metrics, is a different cadre of students, especially, undergraduates. We have an undergraduate experience, and industry is caring for, it really wants people with a capstone experience, where they think about issues beyond just the tech push. So I think one important goal is, if we are producing the kinds of students that our friends in industry and in government and other places say are a richer set and who are more likely to be leaders than we currently are. That'd be one measure. The second measure is more traditional. I think the number of startups, the number of companies that buy these startups, which hire the students that we produce, and so on and so forth. That's the second measure. The third measure, I feel, is almost by way of audit. We found that what has changed from trying to get people to engage in CITRIS is that the number of large projects on campus. So a large project is something which is beyond 5 to 8 faculty. It's more than 2 faculty. It's 5 faculty, frequently in different areas, a group of 50 graduate students, a loose coalition that holds together for 4 or 5 years. And having more of these and actually being able to count and audit these is another measure. As far as how you fund this, I think that certainly the Rising Above the Gathering Storm makes a strong case for the fact that even with a lot of industry support, by and large, I think the major share for the funding of these groups really does need to be on the federal dime. And thus far, it's certainly been the case in CITRIS that a lot of the funding has been federal. And of course, that's under threat unless ACI, the American Competitiveness Initiative, passes and so on and so forth, or gets out of continuing resolution, as the case may be.
Bob? That was extremely well said. I want to just add a couple comments. In my previous life when I was at MIT, I was involved in arranging a number of collaborations with the industry in largely in pharmaceutical and life science area and biotech companies. And each industry actually turned out, when you got into the negotiations, actually had very different goals. And I won't name them purposefully, but for one, and each one was funding research at the level of several $1 million a year on a multi-year basis. And in one company, they really wanted to fund people because they needed more undergraduates and graduate students educated in their area of research. So their area of research and development, so that they would have a stream of future employees, and that was very successful for them. Another company, it was entirely research, and there was a certain area of basic biological research they wanted investigated, but they did not want to make the investment in hiring their own employees, and which it turned out university, MIT in this case, was already doing, and that actually lasted for a long time. It turned out to be a very good investment on their part. So I think there's no single model. The newest model that we have with British Petroleum, and I'm not sure it's a first. I mean, we have the Intel Lablet as a micro example, but I think a really interesting model on their part of putting up funds at the level of $50 million a year and creating a new energy research institute, which will have some part proprietary, but most of the work not directed basic research, not undirected, but directed. For British Petroleum, the metrics are going to be very straightforward, because for British Petroleum, basically, we're going to have to, through our research, develop, first of all, find the ideal plant, switchgrass or miscanthus or who knows what. We're going to have to find, well, my phrase is we have to design in the laboratories artificial termites. that we're going to have to find the genetically programmed microbes that are going to convert this plant matter, whatever it is, into sugars probably, and then sugars efficiently into alcohols. It's a 10-year program. If after 10 years we haven't, the laboratory hasn't produced a cost-effective way of going from plants that can be grown with a very low energy cost to a fuel, then it will not have succeeded. So that kind of program has very well defined metrics.
Next. Questions, thoughts? Right here.
Hi, my name is Rajendra Bose, and I recently finished an interdisciplinary graduate program in the UC system, and I'm very satisfied with that. But I've noticed that there still are challenges in terms of that the hiring process is still based on disciplinary publications and so forth. And I've noticed that can serve as a barrier. For example, in my experience, computer scientists working with others, it's very hard to publish and go to conferences and so forth. So I wondered if you had any comments about how the university system or the community can address some of these challenges.
I'll start with it and then hand it off. I just happened to come from a lunch with some random faculty where that subject was the complete conversation of the lunch, and I got to hear from the faculty about their frustrations within Berkeley from the educational point of view for educational interdisciplinary programs, undergraduate and graduate. And I have to admit, this is not a problem we've solved yet, in fact. So I'm not going to give you a glib answer saying, oh, yes, we'll do X, Y, and Z. But it's a problem which the faculty and the administration are fully conscious of. And and CITRIS is one of an example of a kind of center which is designed to do that for us. But it is true that people's careers tend initially, for young people, relevant to you, we still have a disciplinary stovepipe model for people in their early careers, and we have to break that down. We have to find a way of solving that over the next several years. And this is an example where a great public university like Berkeley has to lead the way. I think, right? So,
not much to add to that. I think that one's right on.
All I'll say is that industry will really value it. So if you can't make it work at academia, seriously, get into an industry lab, knock one out of the ballpark, and they'll be happy to bring you back to tenure.
I think the whole world is suffering a little from this. I mean, we have old categories, and we have a new world. And the challenge is to redefine the categories in which activities take place. And we, universities, are struggling with that like everybody else. Okay, questions? Right here. Hang on, and we'll get you the microphone.
One of the big challenges for people in the developing world is they don't have very good facility with reading and writing. You're trying to find something on the internet, you Google it, you get 500,000 hits. You and I can scroll through and we can figure out which ones are important, not too hard, because we can read fast, we can skim. Are you planning on looking at filtering information so you can take these huge number of hits and instead get them just a few that are maybe a little more relevant?
Am I taking this?
Yeah, I think so.
So again, I don't want to detract from what you're going to hear Eric Brewer a little later this afternoon. So I think all these questions come up. I said future of a $30 cell phone, and of course a lot of people may not even know how to read and write. So questions of voice recognition and then playing back things, having voice synthesis. There is, of course, Google on the Go, which you might have heard of as a way of sorting data and delivering it to devices. So I think that the bits and pieces, the technological bits and pieces are there. On the other hand, to really go back and make sure that they're useful for rice farmers who want to know how much rice costs without going through a middleman and so on. I think these will need some interaction with the user, and sort of these human-computer interfaces that go into it are pretty non-trivial. But I think that there is stuff that's going on which is actually absolutely responsive to this. A group of students at Santa Cruz started a project called Urban Garden, and their goal is to tell poor people in Mexico City how to find nutritious enough foods. And that's an example of the kind of project where they query, saying, how can I get a balanced meal? And they give you low-cost alternatives for getting a balanced meal. So there are multiple such efforts that are going on, and they're non-trivial. And certainly the Blum Center is another exemplar of what's going to address these issues head-on.
Question right here.
Thank you very much. I'm kind of thinking in all this wonderful conversation, back in the early 1960s, there was a leadership in President Kennedy that said we're going to be on the moon by the end of the decade. And that seemed to create an exciting decade where research, scientific, university, industry all worked in this tremendous thrust to get there. Where do you see this type of leadership emerging in addressing these issues, and how can CITRIS and the university and the rest of us try to get that spark that led to so much good happening so quickly?
Well, certainly, I mean, let others add, but certainly just in the past, and it got mentioned already, with the leadership of Norm Augustine and Chuck Vest, we saw this Rising Above the Gathering Storm proposal, which built on a number of others, one of which I happen to be involved in personally also, which did get a resonance in Washington, and which we hoped and turned up in the President's State of the Union address last year. And we hoped that that was then going to translate into the budget, and indeed in this year's budget, if we hadn't ended up in the morass we apparently are in right now, we were going to see very significant increases in funding in the defense sciences, not in basic sciences, but also actually in basic research in the Defense Department. Whether or not the momentum can carry beyond, November and into, since we apparently are not going to have a budget for next year, into next year, I don't know. But we have the equivalent economically, as everyone knows, of the threat that we perceived in the 60s, but it's more diffuse, right? And I think, I don't know if you've read that report, but it's a brilliant report, and I think that panel did as well as it could have in for a call to scientific and engineering arms, so to speak.
And of course, not to be forgotten are state efforts, which seem in certain ways, for instance, climate change, to have more promise than national efforts at this point. Any other comments on the panel, Shankar?
So, so you're talking about metaphors. So I think there's one metaphor is a moonshot. There's a different metaphor, which is attributed to Nike. There is no finish line. I think that perhaps it's not just about getting someplace, because these are really problems that will stay with us. And I think it's really a question of getting our best technologies to continue to engage in them. So healthcare, healthcare is only going to get more and more complicated. So I don't think we can say in the next 10 years we're going to do X. So I think maybe it's a different kind of energy than the 60s, perhaps. David, did you?
Well, you referred to this there is both a spirit of resources and the joint work between industry and government and academia. I think if one looked at the numbers, and I haven't double-checked, so I could be wrong, we'd actually find that the actual resources going into research, particularly in engineering and science today, are enormous compared to the 60s. I very much believe we need a lot more resource, so I'm not saying that's an argument for less or we have enough. But what I'd say is I think we actually have a governance problem, and a self-governance problem that the science and engineering community has not actually done its job of providing the sort of self-leadership. Here are the challenges that we are going to sign up to on behalf of the country and in behalf of the world at large. And I think that's a problem. I think we, in some sense, shouldn't leave it to the whims of presidents, for God's sakes, to set these challenges for us. So I do think we have that. I know in the computing community we've been trying to address this. We've recently actually formed the Computing Community Consortium to try to provide some vision leadership within the community. And that's an early step. But I think we should think of this as a self-governance problem and maybe look a little inward here and say, are we really stepping up and doing our job leadership-wise?
Maybe right here. Microphone is coming.
Thank you. Following along that same line, we see a lot of agreement on the need for addressing disease throughout the world. But does the group see any need for looking at the change of the world that we see coming towards us? In particular, the global warming issue affects some countries very significantly more than others, and some peoples. Is that a target? Is it a target? What's happening to our world down the road, some degree?
Well, I certainly think that there are very many challenges that global warming is charging, and I think there are groups that are looking at the socio-economic aspects of it, as well as groups that are trying to tackle. I mean, there are so many problems to tackle in terms of better energy, less CO2 emissions, CO2 sequestration. There are a lot of strategies going on about how to tackle that. To what degree it's actually being sensitively recognized that certain countries in certain areas are going to be so much more drastically affected. I'm not so sure. Does anybody here know of it? I don't know of any. I'm not aware.
Well, in Canada, they're looking forward to the reopening of the Northwest Passage.
Right.
No, I think we do have people like Dan Kamen who...
We certainly have people
Right,
working,
who
especially
look
on
at
the
these
socioeconomic issues.
Yeah.
Very strong. There are
Right.
quite a few people on this campus that are very much engaged in that.
So in our Institute for the Environment, there are people, I mean, that specific issue who address that very directly. There are also, I mean, on the health side, there's a number of people who specifically are focusing their research efforts on third world diseases, which pharmaceutical
diseases.
companies are not interested in because they don't see any way that they're going to make significant profits. And so that's research that almost certainly has to be done not as directed basic research in universities.
We have time for one more quick question. Yes, right behind the camera.
The director said CITRIS funding is mainly federal funded. So is university or CITRIS cultivating friends in Congress or in state level and national level? Otherwise, how can you get funding?
I think the answer is, I think our faculty in CITRIS really compete on national programs, and I'd like to think we win more than our fair share. But I think the friends in Congress are useful more for setting up programs that we can compete against, rather than to specifically favorize. So. I think some of what David Tennenhouse talked about a second ago is sort of signing up to not the 1960s, as Steve Beck said, but the 1950s, when Vannevar Bush had this, the scientists of America had a compact with the country about signing up for better health care, better economic well-being, and better national security. So I think as an adjunct of that would be a call for greater public funding. And so I would say our contact with Congress is to sort of create the playing field for us.
David.
One of the things, both Shankar and I have gone and done our national service within government agencies. And, it's not just about actually, all Congress can actually do is pork the budget to help you. What's best is actually if an agency asks for the money and then your congressional delegation is helping to get that approved. So you actually have to reach into the agencies, I think, and be very involved in their planning processes. So they're proposing the sorts of programs. It's a lot easier for Congress, to win congressional support for something that's being proposed than it is to get Congress to mandate something that the agencies don't want to do. And from that point of view, the real way to do it, I applaud Berkeley for, and Shankar for going, Berkeley for creating the circumstances in which you could go, and I'd urge you to have more of your faculty go do the public service of being involved. And that will be, I think, what actually assures the continued federal support.
Just to add to that, there's no doubt from the parochial Berkeley perspective that we can do government relations better. And so several months ago, we actually moved government relations, that effort, directly into the Chancellor's office. So it's one person away from myself and Beth. And we're in the process of expanding our government relations staff, really more at the federal than at the state level. And we've put together a council of people on the campus who have particular expertise on state and federal government relations. The other thing is that both for our campus and for the UC system as a whole, we're in the process of putting together a whole set of friends, some of whom are in this audience, who can act as advocates on behalf of not just Berkeley, but on behalf of the universities as a whole, in terms of both state and federal funding of research. And there are many people, including some in the audience, who have very direct relationships with leading politicians. Of course, Dick Blum happens to be married to Dianne Feinstein. That helps. But more than that. And so we can do a certain amount, but actually we feel that our friends and allies in industry are actually probably more important as spokespeople and as people who can influence state and federal government than we are ourselves.
Well, for Richard Newton, I want to thank you all for coming, and please join me in thanking our 4 panelists.